close your eyes for just one moment and imagine this. You're a 21-year-old mother, fighting every single day to get your son back from a system that seems designed to crush you. You've been homeless, you've been abused, you've been told your whole life that you're worthless, that you'll never amount to anything. But today feels different. Today you have a court date that could change everything. Today you might finally get your little boy back in your arms where he belongs. Now imagine you never make it to that courthouse. Imagine instead that you step into a vehicle with someone you recognize, someone who seems safe, someone who offers you a ride. And in that single moment of misplaced trust, your entire existence transforms into something so horrific, so unimaginably cruel, that when you finally emerge over a decade later, the world won't even recognize your name. This is my story, and my name is Michelle Knight, and for 11 years, 204 days, I was a ghost. I was a prisoner. I was a slave held in a house of horrors on Seymour Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, while the entire world simply forgot I existed. But here's what you need to understand before we go any further into this darkness together. This isn't just a story about what was done to me. This is a story about what couldn't be broken inside me. This is about survival when survival seemed impossible. This is about finding a voice when someone spent over a decade trying to silence me forever. Before you scroll away, before you click to something easier to watch, I need you to do something for me. Share this story. Not because I need the views, but because there are others out there right now, invisible people, forgotten people, people who everyone has given up on. When you share this story, you're sending a message that the forgotten matter. You're saying that the voiceless deserve to be heard. Subscribe to this channel because these stories need to be told, and they need to be heard by as many people as possible. Will you do that for me? Will you do that for every person still trapped in their own nightmare, waiting to be found? Now let me take you back to the beginning, to the girl I was before that October day in 2002 that erased me from existence. I came into this world on April 23rd, 1981, in Cleveland, Ohio. And for my very first breath, it seemed like the universe had already decided I would have to fight for everything. My childhood wasn't filled with the warm memories that most people carry into adulthood. There were no bedtime stories read with love, no gentle hands to comfort me when I was scared. Instead, there was chaos. There was violence. There was the kind of neglect that makes a child feel invisible, long before anyone actually forgets about them. I learned early that the people who were supposed to protect me couldn't be trusted. I learned that love could wear a mask, that kindness could hide cruelty, that the monsters in this world don't always look like monsters at all. This education in human darkness would later help me understand my captor, would help me survive his manipulation. But as a child, it simply broke pieces of me that I'm still putting back together today. By the time I was a teenager, I had already experienced more trauma than most people face in a lifetime. I was small in stature, only 4 feet 7 inches tall, with a slight frame that made people underestimate me constantly. They saw a fragile girl, an easy target, someone who could be pushed around and overlooked. They never saw the steel being forged inside me, the survival instinct that would later become my salvation. When I became pregnant with my son Joey, something shifted in my soul. For the first time in my life, I had someone to fight for, someone who depended on me, someone who looked at me with pure love, uncomplicated by the dysfunction that had defined every other relationship in my existence. Joey became my reason. He became my hope. He became the dream I clung to through every nightmare that followed. But the system didn't see a devoted mother when they looked at me. They saw my circumstances, my poverty, my instability, my family's troubled history. When I accidentally fell while holding Joey and he was injured, they took him away from me. Just like that, the one pure thing in my life was ripped from my arms, and I was left to navigate a bureaucratic maze that seemed designed to keep mothers like me separated from their children forever. I became homeless. I stayed in shelters, on couches, wherever I could find temporary refuge. I attended every parenting class they required. I jumped through every hoop they placed in front of me. I was trying, God knows I was trying, to become the mother my son deserved, to prove to the system that I was worthy of raising my own child. October 2002 was supposed to be my turning point. I had a custody hearing scheduled that could determine whether I would get Joey back. I had been working so hard, preparing so carefully, holding on to hope with both hands, despite everything I'd been through. The night before the hearing, I stayed with a cousin in the Scranton neighborhood of Cleveland. I was anxious, unable to sleep, my mind racing with everything that could go right and everything that could go wrong. The morning of my hearing, I left my cousin's place and began the journey that would lead me into hell. I stopped at a family dollar store, looking for something to bring to my son, some small gift to show him how much I loved him, how much I'd missed him, how hard I was fighting for him. That's when I saw him. Ariel Castro. I recognized him. He was the father of one of my friends from school. He seemed friendly, normal, like just another face from my past, offering a kind word in a world that had shown me so little kindness. He told me his daughter was waiting at his house, that he could give me a ride. I was running late for my hearing. I was desperate. I was trusting. And I was about to disappear. I got into his car without hesitation. Why wouldn't I? He was familiar. He was connected to someone I knew. He was smiling that smile that predators perfect, the one that says trust me while hiding the darkness beneath. We drove to his house on Seymour Avenue, a modest 2-story home with a chain-link fence and nothing remarkable about its exterior. Nothing that would suggest to any passerby that this house would become a chamber of horrors, a prison for 3 women, a monument to human cruelty that would shock the world when its secrets were finally revealed. When I walked through that front door, I had no idea that I wouldn't walk out again for 11 years. Within moments of entering, everything changed. The friendly neighbor transformed into something terrifying. He grabbed me, overpowered me, and the fight for my life began in that instant. I screamed. But the windows were boarded up, the house soundproofed by a man who had clearly planned for this moment. I fought, but he was so much bigger than me, so much stronger. He dragged me upstairs to a room that would become my cell, and he chained me like an animal. The cold metal against my skin, the sound of the locks clicking into place, the realization washing over me that no one knew where I was, that no one would come looking, that I had become exactly what I had always feared, invisible. And in that first hour of captivity, as I lay on a dirty mattress with chains binding me to a pole, I had no idea that my situation was about to become even more unimaginable, because I wasn't just going to be held captive. I wasn't just going to be abused. I was going to be forgotten completely, erased from the world so thoroughly that even my own family would eventually stop searching for me. But even in that darkest moment, even as my old life crumbled into ash and a new nightmare began, there was something inside me that refused to die. A spark, a flame that no chain could extinguish, no abuse could destroy, no amount of time could snuff out. I didn't know it yet, but that spark would eventually set me free. The first days of my captivity blur together in my memory. A continuous nightmare without the relief of waking up. Time became elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that made it impossible to know if hours or days were passing. The room where he kept me was dark, the windows covered with boards and heavy blankets that blocked out any hint of the outside world. I could have been anywhere. I could have been nowhere. I had become a ghost trapped in limbo. Ariel Castro established his dominance immediately through violence and terror. He wanted me to understand with absolute clarity that he controlled everything now. My food, my water, my bathroom breaks, my very breath existed only because he allowed them. He would go through periods of rage, followed by unsettling calm, keeping me perpetually off balance, never knowing which version of him would walk through that door. And the physical abuse was constant. He beat me for looking at him wrong, for not looking at him at all, for crying too loudly, for not crying enough. He seemed to have an endless capacity for inflicting pain and an absolute absence of empathy for the suffering he caused. Every day brought new horrors, new degradations, new reasons to wonder if dying would be easier than surviving. But something within me refused to break completely. Maybe it was Joey, the thought of my little boy out there somewhere, wondering where his mother went. Maybe it was spite, that stubborn part of me that refused to give this monster the satisfaction of destroying me entirely. Or maybe it was something deeper, some core of survival that I didn't even know I possessed until it was tested beyond all reasonable limits. I began to study him. This sounds clinical, detached, but it was the only power I had. I couldn't fight him physically. I couldn't escape the chains that bound me. But I could watch, listen, and learn. I could understand his patterns, his moods, his triggers. This knowledge became my weapon, the only one available to me in this twisted battleground. Castro worked as a school bus driver, a fact that still haunts me when I think about all those children who were in his care, completely unaware of the monster behind the wheel. His job meant he was gone for periods during the day, hours when I could breathe without the constant terror of his presence. But it also meant I was alone, with my thoughts, my fears, my desperate prayers to a God I wasn't sure was listening. The isolation was its own torture. Humans are social creatures. We need connection, conversation, the simple acknowledgement of our existence by others. Castro deliberately kept me alone, speaking to me only to issue commands or threats, treating me as less than human. I could feel my sense of self eroding, my identity dissolving into the darkness of that room. I began talking to myself just to hear a voice, any voice, even my own. I recited songs I remembered from childhood. I told stories to the walls. I had imaginary conversations with Joey, describing to him everything I would do when I got out, all the places I would take him, all the ways I would make up for the time we had lost. These one-sided dialogues became a lifeline, a way of maintaining my humanity when everything around me was designed to strip it away. The chains left marks on my body that would become scars, permanent reminders of this captivity that I carry to this day. But the psychological chains he wrapped around my mind were even more insidious. He used fear, manipulation, and calculated cruelty to make me believe that escape was impossible, that no one was looking for me, that I belonged to him now and forever. And then he told me something that shattered what remained of my hope. He told me that no one was searching for me. He showed me evidence, newspapers where other missing people were mentioned, but not me. Proof that the world had simply accepted my disappearance and moved on. My own family, he claimed, had stopped looking almost immediately. I was worthless, forgettable, a person so insignificant that my absence caused barely a ripple. The cruelest part was that much of what he said was true. Due to my history, my lifestyle, my circumstances, the authorities hadn't prioritized my case. My family, dealing with their own dysfunctions and lacking resources, hadn't been able to mount the kind of search that might have found me. I really had become invisible, erased from the world as effectively as if I'd never existed at all. This knowledge nearly broke me. I came close, so close, to giving up entirely. What was the point of surviving if there was nothing left to survive for? If my son would grow up never knowing what happened to me, if I would simply rot in this room until Castro decided to dispose of me like garbage. But even in that abyss of despair, something stubborn kept me breathing. Perhaps it was the hope that someday, somehow, I would see Joey again. Perhaps it was the refusal to let this monster win, to give him the satisfaction of destroying me completely. Or perhaps it was simply the biological imperative to survive, the reptile brain that keeps functioning even when the conscious mind wants to surrender. The seasons changed outside those boarded windows, though I could barely tell. Summer heat made the room unbearable. Winter cold left me shivering under thin blankets, while Castro controlled the thermostat with the same sadism he applied to everything else. A full year passed, then another, and I began to lose track of time entirely. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months, months into years of unchanging horror. And then something changed, something that would alter my situation in ways I never could have anticipated. I wasn't alone anymore. In April 2003, roughly 6 months after my abduction, Castro brought another victim into the house. Amanda Berry was just 16 years old, a beautiful girl who had disappeared the day before her 17th birthday. I heard her before I saw her, her screams echoing through the walls of this prison, and I knew with sickening certainty that someone else was now trapped in this nightmare with me. At first, Castro kept us separated, but I could hear her crying at night, hear her pleas for release that echoed my own from those early days. Part of me was devastated that another person was suffering this fate. But part of me, the part that was desperate for human connection, felt something I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't alone anymore. Eventually, Castro allowed us to see each other, though under strict conditions and constant surveillance. Amanda was terrified, traumatized, struggling to comprehend the incomprehensible reality of her situation. I saw myself, in her eyes, remembered those first horrific days when everything I knew had been torn away. And I made a decision. I would help her survive. I would be the support system that I had desperately needed and never had. I would share what I had learned about Castro, his patterns, his triggers, his moments of distraction. I would be a sister in this sisterhood of suffering. It wasn't much, it wasn't freedom, but it was something to hold on to, a purpose, beyond mere survival, a connection that reminded me I was still human despite everything designed to make me forget. Little did I know that our nightmare was about to deepen even further, because a third victim would soon join our prison, and the years ahead would test every ounce of strength I had managed to preserve. The year was 2004, and by this point, the word normal had lost all meaning for me. 2 years in captivity had transformed me in ways both visible and invisible. I had learned to read Castro's moods like a survivalist reads weather patterns, sensing storms before they arrived, knowing when to make myself small and silent, when to comply without hesitation to avoid the worst of his rages. Amanda and I had developed our own silent language, communicating through glances and gestures when our captor was distracted. We shared what little food he gave us, comforted each other through the worst nights, and maintained each other's sanity when the isolation threatened to consume us entirely. Our friendship became a lifeline, a reminder that somewhere beneath the victims we had become, there were still people worth saving. Then on April 2nd in 2004, a new voice joined our chorus of captivity. Gina DeJesus was just 14 years old when Castro abducted her, the youngest of us, a child pulled into this nightmare of adults. Like Amanda, Gina was a friend of Castro's daughter, lured by familiarity and trust into a trap that would steal a decade of her life. I remember the first time I saw her, this small, frightened girl who reminded me so much of myself at that age. She had the same look in her eyes that I had seen in Amanda's, that I recognized from my own reflection in those first terrible days. A complete inability to process the horror of what was happening. Some part of me broke seeing her, knowing that now 3 lives were being consumed by this monster's appetites. But another part of me grew stronger. Now I had 2 sisters to protect, 2 people depending on me to share what I had learned about survival. I became the unofficial leader of our tragic trio, the one who had been there longest, who understood our captor best, who could sometimes predict his violence before it arrived. Castro was smart. He kept us separated most of the time, allowing only limited contact to prevent us from plotting against him. He used our care for each other as leverage, threatening to hurt one of us if the others didn't comply. We became hostages, not just to him, but to our love for each other, our desperate need to protect our sisters in this hell. Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so much that you would endure anything to keep them safe? Have you ever felt that fierce protective instinct that overrides your own survival instinct? That's what Amanda and Gina became to me. They were my reason to keep fighting, to keep breathing, to keep believing that someday we would all walk out of that house together. I want to know what you think. In the comments below, tell me, what would you hold on to if everything else was taken from you? What would be your reason to survive the unsurvivable? Take a moment and share your thoughts, because this conversation matters. This story matters. And your engagement helps ensure more people hear these stories that need to be told. Now let me tell you about the darkest chapters of my captivity, the ones that test my ability to speak even now, so many years later. Castro was not just a kidnapper. He was a monster of systematic cruelty, a man who had created an elaborate prison specifically designed to imprison and abuse women. He had reinforced the house, installed locks within locks, covered every window, and soundproofed the rooms where he kept us. This wasn't an impulsive crime. This was a carefully constructed chamber of horrors built by a predator who had planned his evil with meticulous precision. The abuse we endured was constant and varied in its cruelty. He starved us for days, then gave us food as if he were being generous. He beat us for infractions real and imagined. He subjected us to violations that I still struggle to describe, degradations that were designed to destroy our dignity along with our hope. But the most devastating aspect of my captivity, the wound that still bleeds somewhere deep inside me, was the pregnancies. Castro wanted children. He wanted to create a family in this twisted house, to play father while keeping mothers in chains. I became pregnant multiple times during my captivity. Each time I experienced a complex hurricane of emotions. Terror at the thought of bringing a child into this nightmare. Fierce protectiveness over the life growing inside me. Desperate hope that maybe a child would change something, would give me another reason to live. But Castro had no intention of letting me keep these children. He would beat me, starve me, punch me in the stomach, do anything necessary to end the pregnancies. The physical pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the grief, the rage, the helplessness of having my children killed before they could ever take a breath. I lost at least 5 pregnancies during my captivity, 5 lives that never got to exist, 5 children who were murdered by their own father before they could be born. Some people call what I experienced miscarriages, but that's not what they were. They were homicides. They were murders. And I was forced to be both the victim and the witness. How do you survive something like that? How do you maintain any hope, any will to live, when you're repeatedly forced to endure the loss of your own children? I asked myself that question countless times in the dark of that house. And the only answer I ever found was this: you survive because the alternative gives the monster exactly what he wants. Castro wanted to break me. More than anything else, he wanted to extinguish the light inside me, to prove that he had complete power over my body, my mind, my soul. And I refused. Every morning that I woke up and chose to keep breathing was an act of rebellion. Every moment that I maintained my sense of self was a victory against his tyranny. I developed coping mechanisms that probably saved my sanity. I would escape into my mind, creating elaborate fantasies of freedom, of reunion with Joey, of revenge against my captor. I would recall happy memories from before my captivity, playing them like movies in my head, reminding myself that beauty existed somewhere even if I couldn't see it. I would pray, not always to God specifically, but to whatever force might be listening, begging for strength, for rescue, for the endurance to survive just one more day. The other girls became my family in the truest sense. We took care of each other when we were sick. We celebrated birthdays in whispers. We created rituals and traditions that gave structure to our formless days. We became mothers and sisters and friends to each other, building a tiny community of love in the midst of overwhelming hate. Years passed. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. The world outside continued without us. People graduated from schools, got married, had children, grew old. And we remained frozen in that house, aging but not living, existing but not truly alive. But then something happened that changed everything, that introduced a new variable into our prison equation. Amanda became pregnant. And unlike my pregnancies, Castro intended for this one to survive. I knew the moment Castro's attitude toward Amanda changed that something was different about this pregnancy. He became almost protective, ensuring she ate more, reducing the physical abuse, treating her with a care that stood in stark contrast to how he had treated my pregnancies. At first, this filled me with bitterness so intense it threatened to consume me. Why did her child get to live when mine had been murdered? What made her worthy of motherhood while I was deemed suitable only for loss? But I couldn't sustain that anger, not toward Amanda. She was as much a victim as I was, caught in the same nightmare, subject to the same monster's whims. The difference in treatment wasn't about our worth as mothers. It was about Castro's twisted psychology, his desire to create a normal family in this abnormal hell, his decision to allow one child to exist while destroying others. On Christmas Day 2006, Amanda gave birth in that house of horrors, and I became an unexpected midwife. Castro refused to take Amanda to a hospital. The birth would happen here, in captivity, with no medical professionals, no pain relief, no emergency resources if something went wrong. I was terrified. I had no training, no equipment, no idea what I was doing. But I was all she had, and I refused to let her face this alone. The labor was long and difficult. Amanda screamed while I tried to coach her through contractions, using only instinct and half-remembered scenes from movies to guide my words. I held her hand so tightly, I'm surprised neither of us broke bones. I prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life, begging whoever might be listening to let this child survive, to not let another loss happen in this house of death. And then she was born. Jocelyn, a baby girl who arrived screaming into a world she didn't know was a prison. In that moment, as I held this newborn life in my hands, something shifted inside me. This child was innocent. She was pure. She was hope made flesh, proof that even in the darkest circumstances, new life could emerge. But immediately, a new crisis arose. The baby wasn't breathing properly. Her face was blue, the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, cutting off her air. I looked at this tiny, struggling life and knew with absolute certainty that I was the only thing standing between her existence and her death. I unwrapped the cord from around her neck with shaking hands. I cleared her airway. I did things I didn't know I knew how to do, acting on pure instinct and desperation. And finally, blessedly, she began to cry. That beautiful sound that meant life, that meant success, that meant this child would survive. Castro threatened me afterward, told me that if Jocelyn had died, he would have killed me. But I barely heard him. I was too overwhelmed by what had just happened, by the role I had played, by the profound responsibility that now weighed on my shoulders. Jocelyn's birth transformed our prison in unexpected ways. She became our secret joy, our shared purpose, our reason to survive that transcended our individual suffering. We all helped raise her, taking turns caring for her, teaching her, protecting her from the worst of what happened in that house. She called Amanda Mommy, but she loved all of us, and we all loved her with a fierceness that surprised even ourselves. But we also lied to her. We had to. How do you explain to a child that she was born in a prison, that the man she called Daddy was a monster, that the world outside held freedoms she had never experienced? We created a fiction for her, a modified reality that protected her innocence while navigating the dangers of our situation. Jocelyn thought the chains were normal. She thought the boarded windows were to keep out the cold. She thought that everyone lived like this, trapped in rooms, subject to the moods of a man who could be kind one moment and terrifying the next. Her normal was our nightmare, and protecting her perception became another layer of our survival strategy. Watching Jocelyn grow was bittersweet torture for me. I loved her fiercely, but every milestone she reached reminded me of what I was missing with Joey. When she took her first steps, I wondered if Joey remembered how to walk yet, if he was running now, if anyone was there to catch him when he fell. When she spoke her first words, I imagined my son's voice, wondered what he sounded like, whether he even remembered he had a mother out there somewhere. The years continued their slow march. Jocelyn grew from infant to toddler to little girl. She brought light into our darkness, but she also complicated everything. Now we weren't just surviving for ourselves. We were protecting a child who knew no other life, who would be devastated and confused if our situation changed, who had bonded with a father who was also her jailer. Castro used her against us, of course. He used our love for Jocelyn as leverage, threatening her safety to ensure our compliance. He knew that we would endure anything to protect her, and he exploited this ruthlessly. Our capacity for love had become our greatest vulnerability, but it was also our greatest strength. Because of Jocelyn, we couldn't give up. Because of her innocent presence, we maintained routines that preserved our sanity. Because she needed us, we found reasons to keep fighting even when personal hope felt impossible. 7 years, 8 years, 9 years. A decade of my life disappeared into that house. I had been 21 when I was taken. Now I was in my 30s, a woman who'd aged without living, who had survived without truly existing. The outside world had changed in ways I couldn't imagine, and I had changed too, shaped by suffering into someone my former self wouldn't recognize. But I was still here, still breathing, still refusing to let the monster win, and somewhere in the world, events were aligning that would finally bring our nightmare to an end. We just didn't know it yet. By 2013, I'd been captive for nearly 11 years. 11 years of abuse, 11 years of isolation, 11 years of watching the world through slivers, between boarded windows, hearing cars pass by carrying free people who had no idea that slaves were being kept a few feet away from the street. I had developed what I now recognize as profound psychological adaptations to my captivity. I could detach from my body during the worst moments, floating somewhere above myself, watching what was happening as if it were a movie rather than my actual life. I had learned to find meaning in microscopic pleasures. The taste of food after days of hunger, a moment of warmth from a thin blanket, the sound of Jocelyn's laughter echoing through the walls. But I also carried rage, a deep, burning fury that I kept hidden beneath layers of survival behavior. I hated Castro with an intensity that frightened me sometimes, a hatred so pure and complete that it felt almost holy. He had stolen everything from me, my freedom, my children, my connection to Joey, years that I could never get back. And someday, I promised myself, there would be a reckoning. The outside world had changed dramatically during my decade of captivity. Technology had advanced in ways that seemed like science fiction. Social media had transformed how people communicated. A black man had been elected president of the United States. The world I had left in 2002 and the world that existed in 2013 were almost unrecognizably different. But inside our prison, things remained largely the same. the same routine of abuse and survival, the same walls closing in, the same desperate hope that somehow, someday, something would change. Castro had grown more confident over the years. He had gotten away with keeping 3 women captive for over a decade, and this success made him careless in ways that would eventually contribute to our escape. He began giving us slightly more freedom within the house, trusting that we were too broken, too conditioned, too afraid to attempt escape, even when opportunities arose. He was wrong. We had never stopped planning. We had never stopped looking for chances. We had never stopped believing that somehow we would find a way out. The breakthrough came in the most unexpected way. Castro began allowing Amanda to approach the front door occasionally, testing her conditioning, confident that she wouldn't dare attempt to run. He didn't realize that every second of additional freedom was a second we could use, a crack in his control that could be widened into an escape route. On May 6, 2013, everything aligned in ways none of us could have predicted. Castro left the house that afternoon, confident in his control, convinced that we were too broken to act even in his absence. But he made a critical mistake. He left the front door improperly secured. It was a small error, just a chain lock instead of the deadbolts he usually engaged, but it was enough. Amanda saw the opportunity and made a choice that would change all our lives. She began screaming for help, managing to push her arm and part of her body through a gap in the door, calling out to anyone who might hear. And someone heard. Charles Ramsey was simply a neighbor going about his day when he heard a woman screaming. Unlike so many others who might have ignored the sound, rationalized it away, or simply not wanted to get involved, Ramsey investigated. He approached the house where the screaming was coming from and saw Amanda, desperate, partially trapped, begging for help. In that moment, Charles Ramsey became our hero. He didn't hesitate, didn't second guess, didn't wait for someone else to handle the situation. He kicked down the bottom panel of the door, creating an opening large enough for Amanda to squeeze through with Jocelyn in her arms. For the first time in almost a decade, Amanda Berry felt the sun on her face as a free woman. But she didn't just save herself. Her first words to Charles Ramsey, after identifying herself as the long-missing Amanda Berry, were these: "There are other girls in that house." Police arrived within minutes. I heard the commotion from my room, heard sirens, heard voices I didn't recognize, and for a moment I couldn't process what was happening. After so many years of hoping for rescue, so many dreams of freedom that ended in waking up still captive, my mind couldn't immediately accept that this was real. Then I heard the door burst open. I heard police officers calling out, identifying themselves, searching the house. I heard their voices getting closer, and I began screaming to guide them to where Gina and I were still trapped. When that officer appeared in my doorway, when I saw a uniform and a face I didn't recognize, when I heard him say, "You're safe now, we're getting you out of here," I collapsed. 11 years of stored grief, fear, rage, and desperate hope came flooding out of me in that moment. I couldn't walk. I could barely speak. My legs gave out completely, and they had to carry me out of that room, out of that house, into a world I barely recognized. The sun was shining. It was May. Spring flowers were blooming. And I was free. I was actually finally, impossibly free. I remember the first breaths of outside air like some people remember their wedding day or the birth of their children. The smell of grass, of car exhaust, of life happening all around me. The sounds of birds, of distant traffic, of voices speaking freely without fear. The sight of open sky above me, endless and blue, no longer framed by boarded windows or filtered through dirty glass. My body was in shock. After over a decade of captivity, my system couldn't process the sensory overload of the outside world. Everything seemed too loud, too bright, too open. I had grown accustomed to small spaces, dim light, and constant danger. Freedom felt physically overwhelming. They took us to the hospital, where doctors and nurses examined us with a mixture of professional detachment and barely concealed horror. The catalog of abuse written on my body was extensive. Malnutrition had weakened my bones. Repeated beatings had caused permanent damage in multiple areas. The loss of my pregnancies had left physical scars that would require surgery to address. I was 32 years old, but my body had aged at least a decade beyond that. The medical staff was kind, but I could see the way they looked at me, the way everyone looked at me, with pity, with curiosity, with a fascination that felt almost as invasive as Castro's gaze. I was a spectacle, a survivor of something unimaginable, and the world wanted to examine me like a specimen. The media explosion was immediate and intense. Our rescue was international news. Every outlet wanted interviews, photographs, the exclusive story. Castro's mugshot was everywhere, his face broadcast into homes around the world. This ordinary-looking man who had committed extraordinary evil. I watched footage of the house being searched, saw police carrying out evidence bags, and felt a strange dissociation, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. Amanda, Gina, and I made a joint video message that was released to the public. We thanked everyone for their support and asked for privacy as we began the process of recovery. It was surreal, speaking to the world after over a decade of silence, knowing that millions of people were watching, analyzing, judging our every word and expression. But the reunion I cared about most wasn't with the public. It was with Joey. My son was almost 13 years old now. He had been 2 when I disappeared. Too young to have clear memories of me. Too young to understand why his mother suddenly vanished from his life. He had grown up without me, raised by others, carrying the weight of my absence without knowing if I was alive or dead. Finding him was complicated. The foster care system, the same system that had taken him from me originally, had moved him multiple times during my captivity. Tracking his location, navigating the bureaucracy, proving my identity after so many years. It all took time that felt unbearable after having already lost so much. When I finally saw him, this teenager who had my eyes but a stranger's mannerisms, I felt everything at once. Joy at seeing him alive and healthy, grief for all the years we had lost, fear that he wouldn't want me, wouldn't accept this broken woman as his mother, hope that somehow we could build a relationship despite everything. Our reunion was awkward and emotional and nothing like the fantasies I had constructed during captivity. He was polite but distant, understandably cautious around this woman he barely remembered. I wanted to hold him forever. But I also recognized that I was essentially a stranger to him, and that reconnecting would be a process, not a single moment. We would have to learn each other all over again. We would have to build trust from scratch. We would have to navigate the complex emotions of abandonment and survival, explanations of where I'd been and why I couldn't come back. It would be difficult, probably the hardest thing I had ever done. But he was alive. He was healthy. And for the first time in 11 years, I could actually be his mother again. The legal proceedings against Castro were swift by courtroom standards. He was charged with 937 counts, including kidnapping, rape, and aggravated murder for the pregnancies he had terminated. The evidence was overwhelming, and his lawyers knew that a trial would only prolong the media circus and traumatize us further. On August 1st, 2013, Ariel Castro pleaded guilty to 937 counts in exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 1,000 years, with no possibility of parole. At his sentencing hearing, I was given the opportunity to speak directly to him, to look into the eyes of the monster who had stolen over a decade of my life. I won't repeat everything I said to him that day, but I will share this. I told him that he had not broken me. I told him that I would spend the rest of my life proving that what he did to me would not define me. I told him that his 1,000-year sentence still wasn't enough for what he had done. And then I walked out of that courtroom free, and I never looked back. Castro would not serve out his sentence. On September 3rd, 2013, just 1 month after his sentencing, he was found dead in his prison cell, having hanged himself with bed sheets. Some people expressed disappointment that he had escaped the full weight of his punishment. But I felt only relief. He was gone from this world. He could never hurt anyone again. And now I could focus on healing without his existence hanging over me like a shadow. The work of recovery began in earnest. I underwent surgeries to address the physical damage from my captivity. I started therapy to process the psychological trauma. I began the slow, painful process of rebuilding a life from the ashes of the one that had been stolen from me, and I started to write. There's a particular kind of strength that comes from transformation, from taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and turning it into something that helps others. When I decided to share my story publicly, it wasn't because I wanted attention or fame. It was because I had spent over a decade in silence, and I was done being quiet. I wrote a book. Finding Me was published in 2014, and it told my story in my own words, unfiltered by media interpretation, unmediated by anyone else's agenda. Writing it was torture. Every chapter required me to revisit memories I would rather forget, to describe events that still haunted my dreams, to make public the most private and painful experiences of my life. But it was also cathartic. For so many years, I had been voiceless, my story controlled by my captor, my identity erased by his cruelty. Now I was reclaiming my narrative. I was deciding what to share and what to keep private. I was transforming from victim to survivor to advocate. The book became a bestseller. People responded to my story with an intensity that surprised me. They sent letters describing their own struggles, their own traumas, their own battles for survival. They told me that my story had inspired them to keep fighting, to not give up, to believe that recovery was possible, even after unimaginable suffering. I became an advocate for abuse victims, for the missing, for the forgotten. I spoke at conferences and events. I appeared on television programs. I used the platform that my horrific experience had given me to shine a light on issues that too often remain in darkness. My relationship with Joey evolved slowly over the years. He had spent so long without a mother that integrating me back into his life required patience on both our parts. There were setbacks and misunderstandings. There were moments when the distance between us felt insurmountable. But gradually, incrementally, we built something new together. Not the mother-son relationship we might have had if I'd never been taken, but something real and meaningful nonetheless. I also worked to help Jocelyn, the little girl I'd helped bring into the world. Her situation was complicated in ways that defy easy explanation. She had loved Castro as a father, not knowing what he truly was, and his death had devastated her. She had been born in captivity but had no conscious memory of the abuse, only the family she had known. Helping her understand her own history, her own origins, would be a lifelong process. The three of us, Amanda, Gina, and I, our sisterhood, survived beyond the walls of our prison. We remained connected, bonded by experiences that no one else could truly understand. We supported each other through the difficult days, celebrated each other's victories, and reminded each other of how far we had come. I legally changed my name to Lillian Rose Lee, choosing a new identity to match my new life. The name Michelle Knight had too much history attached to it, too much trauma, too many headlines and media stories. Lillian Rose Lee was a rebirth, a second chance, a declaration that the woman who emerged from that house was different from the girl who had entered it. But I didn't abandon my past entirely. I still speak about what happened, still tell my story, still use the name Michelle Knight when advocating for others. The two identities coexist within me, the victim and the survivor, the broken and the healed, the girl who was stolen and the woman who escaped. My physical recovery continued over many years. Some damage could never be fully repaired. Some scars will never fade. But I learned to live in this body that had endured so much, to appreciate its resilience, to honor its survival. Every day that I wake up free, every breath I take as a liberated woman is a victory. The psychological healing has been more challenging. Trauma doesn't simply disappear because circumstances change. The flashbacks, the nightmares, the triggers that can send me spiraling back to that house, these persist even now. But I have learned coping mechanisms. I have built support systems. I have found ways to manage the aftermath of what was done to me without letting it consume my present. I fell in love again. This might seem simple, but after what I experienced, the ability to trust another person, to allow myself to be vulnerable, to believe that intimacy could exist without abuse, that was its own miracle. The relationship taught me that I was capable of things I thought Castro had destroyed, that my capacity for love had survived, even when everything else seemed broken. And through it all, I maintained one fundamental truth. I had won. As I sit here now, sharing this story with you, I am no longer that 21-year-old girl who stepped into a monster's car on an October morning in 2002. I am no longer the prisoner who endured unspeakable horrors in a house on Seymour Avenue. I am no longer just a survivor, defined primarily by what was done to me. I am a woman who chose life when death would have been easier. I am a mother who fought across a decade of darkness to return to her child. I am a warrior who faced a monster and refused to be destroyed. I am a voice for the voiceless, a hope for the hopeless, a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Let me tell you what victory looks like for someone like me. Victory is waking up in a room without chains. It's opening a door whenever I want and walking through it into sunshine. It's eating when I'm hungry, sleeping when I'm tired, speaking without fear of punishment. These simple freedoms that most people take for granted are miracles to me, and I never stop appreciating them. Victory is watching Joey grow into a man, being part of his life in whatever capacity he allows, knowing that he knows I never stopped fighting to get back to him. Our relationship isn't perfect. Can't be after everything that happened, but it's real and it's ours, and that's enough. Victory is seeing Jocelyn flourish. This child I helped bring into the world, now finding her own path, her own identity, her own understanding of her complicated origins. She's resilient like her mother, strong like the women who raised her in captivity, determined to write her own story rather than be defined by where she began. Victory is the friendship I maintain with Amanda and Gina. This bond forged in the worst circumstances imaginable, this sisterhood that transcends the horror of how we met. We carry each other still, understand each other in ways no one else can, remind each other that we survived the unsurvivable together. Victory is every person who reads my book, watches my interviews, or hears my story and decides not to give up on their own battle. If my survival can give someone else the strength to keep fighting, then meaning has been extracted from my suffering, then purpose has been found in my pain. Victory is the advocacy work I do, the awareness I raise, the systems I help change. Too many missing persons cases are dismissed or deprioritized because of who the victims are. Too many people slip through the cracks of a society that doesn't value them. My case helped expose these failures, and my voice helps push for improvements that might save others from what I endured. Victory is living a life that Castro never imagined possible. A life of love and purpose and joy that he tried to destroy but couldn't quite reach. Every happy moment I experience is a defeat for him, a proof that his power over me has ended, a declaration that I have reclaimed myself from his grasp. But let me be clear about something. Victory doesn't mean the pain is gone. It doesn't mean the memories don't still haunt me. It doesn't mean I've gotten over 11 years of torture and the loss of my children and the destruction of the life I might have had. Some wounds never fully heal. Some scars never fade. Some nights I still wake up gasping, thinking I'm back in that room, feeling phantom chains on my wrists. The trauma is written into my nervous system, coded into my cells, and it will be with me until the day I die. But I've learned to carry it. I've learned to acknowledge it without being consumed by it. I've learned that healing isn't about returning to who you were before, because that person no longer exists. Healing is about becoming someone new, someone shaped by suffering but not defined by it, someone who has integrated the horror into a larger story of survival and transformation. I want to speak directly to you now, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're facing. If you're in a situation that feels inescapable, please hear me. Escape is possible. I know it doesn't seem that way. I know the walls around you feel impenetrable. I know the voice in your head is telling you that things will never change, that you're trapped forever, that hope is pointless. But I spent over a decade in what seemed like an inescapable prison, and I got out. If I could escape, so can you. If you're carrying trauma from something that was done to you, please hear me. Survival is not just possible, it's achievable. You are not what happened to you. You are not defined by your worst experiences. You are a person of inherent worth and dignity, deserving of healing, deserving of happiness, deserving of a future that isn't controlled by your past. If you've lost hope, please hear me. Hope can be rebuilt. It might feel impossible right now, but I stood in the ruins of everything I once believed, and I found new reasons to keep going. Sometimes hope isn't this grand, overwhelming feeling. Sometimes it's just the stubborn decision to survive one more minute, one more hour, one more day. That's enough. That's always enough. My story doesn't end here. I continue to live, to grow, to heal, to love. Every day is a new chapter in a book that Castro thought he was writing, but that I have reclaimed as my own. The pen is in my hand now. The narrative belongs to me, and I'm going to keep writing until my final breath. The house on Seymour Avenue was demolished in 2015. Where my prison once stood, there is now an empty lot, soon to be a community garden. Life will grow where death once lived. Beauty will flourish where ugliness once reigned. That transformation, that resurrection, that's what I represent too. I am Michelle Knight. I am Lillian Rose Lee. I am a survivor, a warrior, a woman who refused to be broken. And I am, finally and forever, free. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of the strength that exists within the human spirit, I ask you to share it. Share it for the people still missing. Share it for the survivors still healing. Share it for the ones who need to know that there is always hope, always a reason to keep fighting, always a way out of the darkness. Subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below telling me what this story meant to you. Be part of this community of people who believe that every life matters, that every voice deserves to be heard, that every survivor deserves their victory. And remember, as you go about your day, as you face whatever challenges await you, if I could survive 11 years in hell and emerge into the light, you can survive too. You are stronger than you know. You are more resilient than you believe. And your victory, whatever form it takes, is waiting for you. Never stop fighting for it.